Welcome back to the DepDiv podcast, ladies and gentlemen, to the only podcast where we take massive, universe-sized ideas and aggressively shrink them until they fit inside your brain without causing overheating. Today's topic, miniaturization. Yes, making things smaller. Because apparently humanity looked at the Grand Canyon and said, cool, but can we make a computer out of a grain of sand? And honestly, I respect that level of unnecessary ambition. So today we're talking about a legendary lecture by physicist Richard Feynman, who basically stood up in 1959 and said, hey guys, what if we just made everything insanely small? At the time, this sounded like pure science fiction. Or, like something a guy says right before getting politely escorted out of a conference. But turns out, he was right. Annoyingly right. Like, I told you so from across the decades kind of right. And this was his big central challenge. Speaking at the California Institute of Technology, he throws this question out there. Now, it sounds like a weird party trick, right? But it was a serious provocation. He wasn't just talking about tiny writing. He was asking why we weren't thinking and building on a completely different microscopic scale. Okay, so let's get into this. How on earth did he justify such a wild idea? Well, it's actually shockingly simple when you break it down. Let's break this down. Feynman's whole idea was this. There is no law of physics that says we can't build things atom by atom. That's it. That's the secret sauce. No magic, no aliens, no because I said so. The only things holding us back were our own engineering skills and, frankly, our imagination. And here's the beautiful part. Physics is actually pretty chill about all this. I mean, it has some hard rules, right? You can't break the speed of light. You can't create energy from nothing. But rearranging atoms, building tiny machines, physics basically just shrugs and says, yeah, if you can figure out how to do it, go for it. I'll allow it. The real problem isn't physics. It's engineering. So Feynman basically asked these fundamental questions. Why are all our machines so big? Why can't we cram entire libraries into these tiny little spaces? And seriously, why aren't we just rearranging atoms like they're Lego blocks? And you can just imagine everyone at the time going, cool story, Richard. Now let's go back to building refrigerators the size of a small apartment. But let's just fast forward to today for a second. That phone in your pocket, it has more computing power than all of NASA had during the Apollo missions. We are literally manipulating individual atoms with things called scanning tunneling microscopes. And nanotechnology is now a real field of study, not just some buzzword from a sci-fi movie. So yeah, the man called it. So how do we get from a wild lecture in 1959 to the world we live in now? Well, Feynman didn't just talk. He put his money where his mouth was. He offered 2 cash prizes of $1,000 each. Now, it might not sound like a lot, but it was a brilliant move. It made his vision concrete. It set clear, tangible engineering targets. He was basically daring the world to prove him right. And people took the bait. The first challenge for a tiny motor was met almost immediately by a guy named William McClellan in 1960. The second one, writing a page of a book on a microscopic scale, that took a little longer. But it was finally claimed by Tom Newman in 1985. And just a year after that, the invention that would truly unlock this new frontier, the scanning tunneling microscope, won the Nobel Prize. The dominoes were falling, just like Feynman said they would. And what's so fascinating here is how they did it. That tiny motor, the one that fit in a 1/64-inch cube, it was built by William McClellan using a microscope, a watchmaker's lathe, and a toothpick. I mean, come on, a toothpick. That's just old-school craftsmanship pushed to its absolute limit. But the tiny writing prize, that was won by Tom Newman, a grad student, using a much more advanced technique, electron beam lithography. He was basically writing with a focused beam of electrons, a true preview of the future. So the prizes were won, the prophecy was fulfilled. What happened next? Well, this is where Feynman's thought experiment just explodes into an entire field of science. And the result of all that was nanotechnology. Now, Feynman laid the conceptual groundwork back in '59, but the term itself was actually coined later, in 1974, by Norio Taniguchi. And this is the science behind things like stain-resistant fabrics, super-strong carbon nanotubes, and even targeted drug delivery systems that can attack cancer cells without harming the rest of your body. Now, here's where it gets spicy. If you can build machines at the atomic scale, you could also build self-replicating systems, create materials with insane properties, and potentially mess things up. This is where people start whispering about gray goo, nanobots, and all those wild sci-fi apocalypse scenarios. But relax. We can barely get software updates right without breaking everything. We're not getting world-ending nanobots anytime soon. We'll probably get nanobots that crash and require a reboot first. But Feynman was thinking about the benefits too. He talked about this thought experiment from his friend Albert Hibbs. What about swallowing the surgeon? Imagine a tiny mechanical surgeon you could swallow that would travel through your blood vessels and repair a heart valve. It sounded totally far-fetched then, but it showed he was already thinking about useful, life-saving applications, not just tiny encyclopedias. All right, quick pause before your brain starts shrinking itself. If you're enjoying this explainer, do the thing. Subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend, or better yet, whisper into their ear. Physics says we can shrink everything, including your attention span. That'll get them curious or concerned. Either way, we win. So after all of this, the prizes, the prophecies, the tiny surgeons, what's the crucial point? What's the big idea here? So what's the takeaway? Feynman didn't invent nanotechnology. He just looked at reality and said, there's a lot of room down there. He gave us the mindset. He opened the door and he challenged an entire generation of scientists and engineers to walk through it. And humanity basically responded, say less. Now we're living in a world where the biggest breakthroughs are happening at the smallest scales, which is kind of poetic and also slightly terrifying and very, very cool. And before we go, a glowing, microscopic-sized shout out to our producer, FireflyHaku, the only producer who probably heard this topic and thought, can we compress the entire podcast into one atom and still monetize it? Honestly, give it a few years. Physics won't stop him. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, just because something can be made smaller doesn't mean your problems will be. See you next time.